And good evening, fellow listeners and viewers. Tonight is 8:29 p.m., Sunday, January 21st. I am Federico Lyons of States' Rights Radio and
Seth Hancock of Seth Hancock Reports. In tonight's episode, we're going to be discussing two segments. First, is the census constitutional or a bureaucratic red tape? And who makes the laws, Congress or the World Economic Forum? And so I guess we'll start with the census. And, I guess that question, whether it's constitutional or a bureaucratic red tape, it could be both. Because, yes, the Constitution does allow for a census, and there's reasons for that. But it's also turned into this bureaucratic red tape. And, I'm not opposed to there being a census, but what is the census for? To me, it's just simply to get a count so that we can allocate congressional representation to each state and, things like that. But it's turned into this big bureaucratic agency that collects all this information that the government has no right to know from you, that has nothing to do with a simple count. And that's kind of why, we wanted to discuss that this week, is because there's new questions being asked on the American Community Survey, which is a monthly survey issued by the U.S. Census Bureau to collect detailed housing and socioeconomic data from about 3.5 million households will receive this survey. And most of the questions, you have no... the American people do not have to answer. The only question you need to answer is how many people live in your home, and that's supposed to be every 10 years that they ask you, and then they should just leave you alone. But now we have this bureaucracy called the U.S. Census Bureau, which was created in 1902, so, we don't even need this bureaucracy. We can just do a census every 10 years and be done with it, but of course, we have to have a bureaucracy that probably gets tons of money from us to basically gather information on us so they can destroy our liberties in however ways they want to. The census is constitutional, but do we need this big agency called the U.S. Census Bureau? I say no, and I think... we don't need to answer any other questions other than the count.
Yeah, no, I think I will go with you, Seth. I think it is constitutional, but how far does it go? I mean, are these questions being approved by Congress, or it's done by some bureaucratic red tape desk by the name of William Smith at the Census Bureau, care of the Department of Commerce, inventing these questions and saying, I'm going to put it through and, we'll get the blessing from the president and blah, blah, blah. But the true blessing must come from Congress. So if Congress doesn't approve this, then these questions should not come to light and should not be printed on. And you're right, the census was just to make count of population and citizens in each state, and to see, what was the representation of each congressional district and state, and and all that, in order to count the population. But as far as what is your sex, or what is are you looking for? Do you identify as a man or a woman or they or them? I mean, that's they don't need to know that. I mean, they don't even know what's your sex. I mean, do you live in this? How long have you lived in this city, in this county, in this state, in this country? And that's about it. Did you move? And all that. So it is very unnerving to see how the federal government has become intrusive in its way. But yet again, I'm not surprised, because the federal government will find any way, by any means, legally, to increase their size and say, oh, the census is constitutional. We have a right to ask these questions. No, you don't. Congress has a right to ask, and Congress will have to approve. Has this been approved by Congress? And they'll, of course, say, yes, they has. But this is just another excuse to make this federal government larger and bigger at our expense. And I say we have to, really question these questions and just answer the ones that we have to answer, which is, your count in your state and your population. That's it.
Yeah, and the thing people need to kind of sit back and question is, why are they asking this and why are they asking that? I mean, here's some of like they're going to question in this monthly survey the level of certain disabilities, including mental disabilities, or whether they have psychosocial, cognitive, or speech disabilities. The thing that comes to mind for me is the push for gun control. There's always this constant push for gun control, and they often want to include people who have been diagnosed with mental issues to strip their Second Amendment rights. I think they're asking this question so that they figure out who their gun rights away, or they're asking questions about the number of electric vehicles or use of solar panels, things like that. And you think about the green movement and the push to basically destroy our energy with, I'm thinking of electric vehicles right now because we've had this cold snap here in Illinois, where we actually have this graveyard of electric vehicles in Oak Brook, Illinois, because all these electric vehicles, their batteries are being drained because of the cold. But they're pushing us towards wanting to mandate electric vehicles only. And so why do they ask these questions? They need this information so they can put in place their agendas for destroying our liberties. And the same thing, they are pushing to ask people about their sex assigned at birth and their current gender identity and sexual orientation. Why? Why do they need to know this information? The only reason I can see is that they want to take away our rights, and they need this information to help craft their plans to take away our rights. That's the real question that Americans should ask. Why are they asking us for this information? I don't think the answer is good.
No, one thing is I've seen Lake Michigan is completely frozen from videos and all that. So, yeah, you guys are having a hell of a winter storm. And I also heard that various residents with electric cars, mostly Teslas, are locked out because, the power grid is off base and they can't get electricity into their cars. So, I hope this will be a wake-up call to those members of Congress and certain legislatures, one of them in particular in California, where they want to do electric cars in 10 years, that, we don't have the infrastructure for electric cars. So that's a bad idea. This country is run on gas. I do want to see electric cars, and I'm glad we're pushing for Tesla and other brands. I know Toyota has, but, we don't, right now, the majority of Americans here, they have vehicles that run on gas. And whose fault is that? The oil companies, that also oil companies give money to politicians to keep that. So, the only ones that we have to blame is the politicians, but of course they don't want to take the blame, so then we're stuck with it. But, and then, like I said, yeah, they want these questions for, your sex and gender identity and all that for control. And you're right. This is also an inclination for certain infringement of the Second Amendment. But, this is something that I've mentioned time and time again. The Second Amendment doesn't say guns. It says arms. So are they just going to restrict guns? After they restricted guns, are they going to go after swords? Are they going to go after baseball bats? or lead pipes or knives, those are arms too. So, this really has got to stop here, and really read what it means with the Second Amendment. It doesn't say guns, doesn't say AR-15s or AK-47, it says arms. So, it's, again, where there is a value of ignorance from all around that they don't bother to read, don't bother to learn. And, that's where it scares me. So they expect us to get this from the government and answer it. Why? Since when did the federal government become the master and we the slaves? When did that happen? We are supposed to be the masters and they the servants. Because they are our public servants. So this thing has got to stop from both sides. And both political parties are just useless in doing that.
Yeah, and as you just ended there with both sides, a lot of what we just discussed on, disabilities and gender identity and all that stuff. These are questions that certainly appeal more to the left, but I want to go back to something I found that was being pushed by the so-called right back during the Trump administration, where they wanted to ask about citizenship status and whether people were here legally or not. And, which, by the way, if you want people to answer your survey, if you're here illegally, you're probably not going to answer the survey if they're asking you about your legal status. But that's just, something they don't even think of. But the real reason they wanted to ask that was because of the effect it would have on federal aid to cities. They wanted to know, can we give less money to this city because they have more illegal immigrants than other cities, and that gets to the problems with the federal government taking so much money from us to begin with. The problem is because there's no plans to stop the welfare. There's no plans to stop the big government spending. They just want to find ways to not give money to Democrat cities. So they add that question back then. But what we really should be doing is getting the government out of all these social services. This is not the job of government. And but because there's no will to do that, they play these games and use the U.S. Census Bureau to try and get more information that the government doesn't have a right to know.
And I'm glad you brought that out, Seth, because that's exactly the problem that you and I see and you and I foresee, is that here you have a Republican president still using the power of the federal government to infringe on our rights, regardless of what the question is. Are you a citizen or are you not a citizen? I mean, that's not the main focus on the census. The census is to make a count on how many people live in your district, so then you can see how many electoral votes or and stuff like that gets counted on. That's the main purpose of the census. It's not to show you, it's not to take it to the Immigration Customs Enforcement Agency or ATF or IRS. Absolutely not. They're missing it. And you pinpoint as well. It's also about funding and what states to fund if they answer correctly. So if Florida answers that survey, say that we're all legal citizens and we want illegals out, then the federal government administration will send money to Florida for that type of enforcement. And that's, they're using, this is where I lose it with Trumpers and people that, and even people from the left, is that, Trumpers want less government, but only on their issue, and liberals only want less government only on their issues, and that's not what it's supposed to be. Read it. The federal government has only a few enumerated powers, and this is not one of them. They're missing out what is the main purpose of the census, both on the Republican side and the Democrat side. And quite frankly, on immigration, I don't believe Congress has that authority to enforce the naturalization clause. I believe it's left to the states to enforce it. I believe it's, they've said it in multiple Supreme Court rulings, where DeCantis versus Baca, and even in Kansas versus Garcia, they have been leaving it up to the states. And this is not somewhere that, that's why I despise the whole build the wall, because I don't want my tax dollars going to Texas. Now, what Governor Abbott is doing down there, that's fine. As long as he doesn't use federal funding, he can do whatever he wants. I could care less. That's his state. That's his border. It's his territory. It's not the federal territory. It's his territory. So, yeah, it's very unnerving to see the Trump movement use the federal government to their advantage, and then the Biden administration to use it to their advantage. How about to use it to no advantage and just keep it out of it and let the states and local communities run their area as they see fit and with accordance to the Constitution?
Yeah, and that really is the problem that we see in every aspect of the way the government operates, and the U.S. Census Bureau is no different. And it's the federal government doing things that the federal government doesn't have authority to do under the Constitution. And it's just how do we get back to the constitutional republic? And one way is shutting down these unconstitutional agencies, and that's something that just with the U.S. Census Bureau, like I said, it didn't form until 1902. So for a lot of American history, we didn't even have this bureaucracy. We just had the government asking questions. And this kind of goes to a point I've made on a lot of government, that I don't think we need any of the bureaucracies in Washington, D.C. The few powers or authority that the federal government has, they don't need these big bureaucracies. They just need the president has a cabinet, and Congress writes some laws, and but in my opinion, we can shut down every single federal bureaucracy and just have this small federal government that just sits there and looks pretty and doesn't do anything to us. But unfortunately, we have this Leviathan that seeks to control everything we do, and that's the big problem.
Yeah, it is. And one last point before we move to the next segment. The U.S. Census Bureau was established in 1902 during a Republican administration, which was TR, which I don't know why many people think that he was a great president. To be honest with you, I don't think he was a great president. I mean, I think he used the Rough Riders as a publicity stunt to get fame and fortune into him running, him becoming president. And this is just, another populist candidate trying to get something, and trying to make something big out of the federal government, like the Department of Interior, the U.S. Census Bureau, the Great White Fleet that he sent around the world, posing America as a threat, and as America as a global empire. So, and this is something that that's the first start of Woodrow Wilson and FDR and et cetera, all the way up to Donald Trump and Biden. But, it's, we don't need this. We don't need a Census Bureau. We don't need a ICE, ATF, FBI. We don't need those agencies, the CIA, because they're not needed. It's not within the Constitution. So we need to find a way to get rid of it. And one way is to refuse to cooperate with UN officials, refuse to cooperate with legislators from other states, and stop doing it, because I'm only in favor of the census, but there needs to be some bounds in what is allowed on the census, and this should not be allowed by many state legislatures. But I don't know if we'll see that, because again, many legislators, just as American citizens, are educatively ignorant and they don't want to know it, and that's just very sad to see that. But the next segment, Seth, is about the World Economic Forum. I'll let you take the lead on that. So we can also explore that issue where, again, the Americans are also ignorant and less educated to know, why do we have these organizations and what is truly the point.
Yeah, and so a lot of people may or may not know that the World Economic Forum is meeting, or has been meeting. I think it's probably over by now. I think it was for the week. But they have their annual conference in Davos, Switzerland. And it's where a group of billionaires and politicians from around the world gather to basically discuss their plans for ruling over the rest of us. I mean, that's probably the best description you can give to it. But, and there's a lot of things that I've seen, they were discussing Disease X, which is, this theoretical disease that they're already working on a vaccine for, which, I'd like somebody to explain to me, how can you start working on a vaccine for a theoretical disease that you don't even know about? But that's maybe too much to ask for an explanation on that. But, there's been a lot of talk about Ukraine there and how the West needs to continue supporting Zelensky, the comedian turned puppet president of Ukraine. And, you've got U.S. Senator Chris Coons is there. John Kerry's there as usual. A lot of American politicians and bureaucrats. But beyond just the kind of the silly things I see coming out of there, or the kind of sickening things that I see out of there, the push for, like I said, Disease X. The question is, how can we have national sovereignty when we send politicians and bureaucrats to participate in these globalist organizations like the World Economic Forum, like the United Nations, like the World Health Organization? Don't we effectively already have a global government when these organizations exist? The United States, I go back to the founding fathers when it comes to like foreign policy, where they talked about, having honest trade with all, friendships and alliances with none. We're just supposed to leave other countries alone, let them do what they're going to do, as long as they leave us alone to let us be sovereign ourselves. And, these organizations smack against that. It's just evidence of the world government that I believe that they want to put in place, and I think they've effectively already have it. It's just not official yet. But I don't think we should be participating in organizations like the World Economic Forum or the United Nations. I think it goes against everything our nation was founded on, to be this society, this free nation that's sovereign and valuing liberty over security. And I think we shouldn't have people participating in these organizations.
No, you mentioned the founding fathers, and would they have joined up with these organizations? I probably maybe Thomas Jefferson would have joined because he did want to join up with the French against the British. But the Barber Pirates, which the Barber Pirates War. He did join up with the British to combat the pirates who were seizing U.S. commercial ships, and Congress didn't approve war, but they did give approval to send arms into that armed conflict. But as far as these organizations, these organizations like the United Nations, the Organization of American States, the World Economic Forum, all these G20, G17 organizations, NATO. Unfortunately, they have been made by people that are not framer-oriented, ideal gentlemen and ladies. They are framed by pompous bureaucrat maniacs. Particularly one that I really dislike is General George Marshall. I think he was not a good strategist. I don't think he was a good general. He may have served in the First World War, and then he got to be Commander of Joint Chiefs since the Second World War, but he's the one that initiated the UN, initiated the OAS. He's the Marshall Plan, which was federal government funding to European nations on the Western Front, France and Austria and Germany and all that, and West Germany. So, that's, people, when I think of the Marshall Plan, that's a bailout. And again, does Congress really have the authority to give bailouts to international countries? And that's the first one that it's an international country. It's a bailout. They're doing it to Ukraine. They're doing it to Kosovo, and other and around the world. Not just Israel, which I support Israel, but not federal funding or armed funding in Asia with Korea and Japan. So the only international organization I see fit is the one in The Hague, which is the International Court of Justice. That's the only one that I think that it's suitable to be an international organization. But the League of Nations was a complete disaster. The League of Nations didn't stop Hitler one bit. So the United Nations hasn't stopped any genocide. Remember the Rwandan genocide? They allowed thousands and hundreds of innocent civilians of the Tutsi tribe being murdered and slaughtered, and the UN did not do jack squat. So what is the use of these organizations if they're not going to do anything? So it's and yet here's this concept of America that some wants to be an isolationist, some wants to join in, but they don't understand it. It's Congress who decides. It's not the president. It's not a bureaucrat. It's Congress. So, we've taken this pompous celebrity status of a president where, he's hugging and kissing. Yes, he's the commander-in-chief. He's the head of state and the chief of state, and he's managed the State Department, but that's it. As far as funding, it's Congress. So why should we be funding for this? Sadly, people have to know the true history of these international organizations and how it really started. And I just find it unbearable that the American people don't wake up to this. And I do support Israel. I think Israel has a right to exist, and they have a state, and they have to coexist. They have to coexist with the Palestinians, and they have to find one way to live together in harmony without being slaughtered. But I don't believe Congress has a right to fund that peaceful transition of status. So I do hope that people realize that how much does Congress has, how much does the president has, and honestly, it's not the World Economic Forum that makes our laws. It's Congress that makes the laws. It's Congress who has the authority. So I hope that people will see this in this next election. And I'm not saying vote for Trump, because Trump is no better when he goes into these G20 summits. He acted like a pompous jerk and wanted to be the head honcho there. And again, I don't want that either. I don't want him to be the head honcho. So Trump is no better. And Biden didn't make it. I wonder why Biden didn't make the World Economic Forum and he sent VP Harris. I guess he wasn't feeling well, but that's kind of sad. But yeah, let's get away from these organizations and try to see a world of isolationism, but not in a true isolationism as how it was before the Second World War.
Yeah, and one of the things that I kind of think of is, our government is supposed to listen to us, we the people, not to other world leaders. Do I think that we need to have we need to have diplomacy with other nations. And so, we might have diplomats who meet with foreign leaders on occasion, but it's just these rise of these organizations just show us that it's these elitists, these corporations that don't operate in a free market system, that have gained a lot of their power and influence by owning politicians, not by building themselves up in a free market system. But I think of like last year, the Republican governor from Georgia, Brian Kemp, attended the World Economic Forum. Like explain to me why a governor is using taxpayer dollars to fly overseas to go talk to a bunch of globalists. I mean, that should offend people in Georgia. In my opinion, I think that should be offensive to people. Or, I wrote about Boris Johnson coming here to America last year to go talk to Republicans in Texas, and then in the United States Congress, he had these. He gave these speeches to Congress and to the Texas General Assembly about how Republicans need to support Ukraine, how Republicans need to steal our money, our taxpayer dollars, to send over to a puppet in Ukraine. And I mean, beyond my opposition to what we're doing in Ukraine, it's not just that. It's that we have these foreigners who are able to come and lobby our Congress, while the American people, we have no access to the politicians who are supposedly representing us. I mean, that should offend people, that your government doesn't care about you, but they care about what globalist leaders think. And it's just backwards, in my opinion.
Well, I do have to say, I do see why a governor of Georgia went up to the World Economic Forum, because as a man of sovereign states, it is the states who should regulate commerce and bring commerce to their state. So, he wants to bring businesses into Atlanta and Savannah and Macon. So I do see that. I don't see the president of the United States. I mean, he can also go, but I don't mind seeing a governor if it's gonna enrich his own state without federal funding. Then I'm okay with that. I don't see any issue with that. I see the Department of Commerce taking that role of regulating commerce and saying, Georgia does it, but we have to regulate your commerce. Or what happened with the case in the Supreme Court where California sued the state of Missouri for the way they processed the pork, and Congress had to step in, and the court has to step in and say that Congress regulates commerce. Well, not really. If California doesn't like the way that Missouri companies slaughter pork, then don't do business with Missouri. Find another pork-friendly state to process that pork and buy it from them. Oregon, Washington State, Montana. There's tons of states you could do business. So, I don't mind a governor going and seeking business to help his state, as long as there's no federal funding attached to that. That's where I have the problem, is when they attach federal funding into whatever programs. And that's where also, again, if the congressional delegation of Georgia, when they attach economic bills or something like that, and they attach funding to go to Atlanta, Georgia, to go to Savannah, to go to Florida, to go to Chicago, no. I mean, let the states manage on its own. I mean, it's very sad to see the state of Illinois, for example. That's a rich state. It's got a lot of money in that state, but yet they bring in more federal funding than you can possibly imagine, and that's not right. I mean, there's wheat, there's corn, there's mines in Illinois. There's a lot of money in Chicago. It's a very wealthy city, and they got a lot of factories in Chicago. And yet, the congressional delegation of Illinois brings in a lot of federal pork spending, and that's not right. The same thing with Florida. They bring a lot of federal funding for their highways and trains and all that. That's not, or orange, or for the orange growth. That's not right as well. It's a problem where who has the power to regulate? Regulate is a funny word, and I think in the sense of how it was structured in the Commerce Clause, it doesn't mean that Congress has the power to enforce the clause, to enforce it. It's the power to administer, to manage it, to make sure states are enforcing it accordingly and all that. So, the federal government has no right to interfere in the commercial aspects of every state. So, to point that thought of Governor Kemp doing that, I see no issues. If it's to do well-being in its own state without federal funding, knock yourself dead. I mean, make sure Atlanta is bigger than Nashville or Tallahassee or Miami.
Yeah, I have to think about that a bit. But one of the big problems with it, I just pulled up a piece I wrote about it last year, and my governor, J.B. Pritzker, was also in attendance at the World Economic Forum last year, and but the thing is, they kind of there's no transparency to it. I wrote back last year about a outlet from Atlanta was trying to get a statement from Kemp's office on just why was he going to attend the World Economic Forum? What was what were the conversations that he was going to have? And Kemp's office refused to answer. So there's no transparency. So, and that kind of is a big problem with these globalist organizations, is they basically allow their own controlled media to attend and cover their events, while journalists who actually want to dig deep into what's being discussed are generally kept out. They don't want them anywhere near these events. And so that's a big problem with them. And there's no transparency, and there's a lot of closed session meetings, and basically, I'm, from my background being in journalism, I have a belief in government being nearly 100% transparent. That's the way it should be. I mean, I get certain things being redacted. If we have people in harm's way and we can't give information, okay, I get that. But for the most part, I think we need to have far more transparency than what we have. And I think these types of organizations help promote this kind of secretive type government that we've gotten used to in America.
Yeah, and I think and you're right, there should be more transparency. But the thing is that, in light of what's happening, where these companies are giving campaign funds to senatorial candidates, congressional candidates, and local offices and all that, then that's where the secrecy comes. If we didn't have that, now again, companies should give whatever amount of money, because as the Supreme Court said, companies have First Amendment rights, so they can give to whatever they want. It should be open about it. But I mean, you mentioned, Governor Pritzker going to the World Economic Forum. Now, I see from your esteemed governor, he's bringing jobs, but he's attaching with those jobs government funding. He's I can see that. I can see Governor Pritzker, talking with his congressional delegation, Durbin and Duckworth. No, is it Duckworth? Who's the other senator?
Duckworth, yeah.
Yeah, Duckworth. I see them both, saying, we're going to bring jobs to a local community, but then it's going to be attached federal funding to it, and union benefits and all that, and union contracts. So I can see that from him, which is wrong. I mean, if he wants to bring jobs to Illinois, hey, that's great. Bring jobs to Illinois. But don't attach federal funding. But yet you attach federal funding because the federal government is asking for something. It's asking for cooperation for a legislation that they want to pass or something. And that's wrong. It's totally wrong to attach federal funding. Now, again, on important issues, and I just want to make a parenthesis here. Important issues like the Civil Rights Act of '64, I have no problem with that act. What I do have a problem, and what I've said once or twice on this show, is the federal funding that was attached to the Civil Rights Act. That's why Barry Goldwater opposed it, and 3 other Republicans. Is the federal funding attached with a prestigious and great legislation was the Civil Rights Act. I have no issues with that. It's the federal funding. Why does the federal government have to attach funding to a legislation like the Civil Rights Act or the American Investment Act? Why? Where is the constitutional precedent there? There is none. There is no, James Madison vetoed a public works bill because he said that's not the role of federal government. It's the role of the states to manage its own public works. It's not the role of the federal government. There should not be any Interstate Highway Act. There should not be any issues like that. But yet again, thanks to Eisenhower and not Robert Taft, we have now a corrupt Interstate Highway Act that funds for highways that I will never even see. I mean, I've only driven a few highways out west that, that's it. But I haven't driven in the highway in Chicago, Illinois, or whatever. I'll never see it. But my money will go there. That's so wrong. It should be by the states and work together to make a more perfect union. But that's being a little more philosophical and ideological. But that's the main premise. As long as there's no federal funding to these jobs coming from Davos or wherever, these billionaire companies, that's fine. I have no issues. I have no issues if Princeton wants to go and bring jobs to Illinois. I think it's great. Just keep your congressional delegation in line and tell them, butt out, and let me do this. Let me bring jobs to my people. And I think that would be a great ideal. But until then, we're going to have those corporations skimming their way and sending campaign funds to these candidates and getting greased up by the local politicians and aldermen.
Yeah, and that brings up an interesting point that I've seen locally, and we talk about federal funding and even county funding or state funding, how it just it destroys local control. I've seen it here. I cover several municipalities that have had they've had traffic issues on roads within their villages, and but they can't do anything about it because it's a county controlled road or it's a state controlled road, and they have all these residents who have all these complaints about traffic issues on these roads, and the villages are saying, we could do this, we could do that we think would help ease these problems and concerns, but we can't get approval from the county or from the state. And that's what happens is when you attach the federal funding, you lose local control, and people don't seem to see that. They don't understand how it, like we've talked about police issues in the past, and it's my take is always that we need to localize police, but there's all this federal funding that's attached, and so there's no reform to be made because you have to follow what the federal government dictates. Well, that's the problem. We need to keep our money locally, and I often think we are completely inverted in the way that our country's supposed to operate. The local government's supposed to be the most powerful government in your life, and then the state, and then the feds, but it's been flipped upside down where the feds are the most powerful, and then the states, and then the local, and that's all goes back to funding and the federal government stealing all our money and then divvying it out to the states and local governments, and that's the problem.
That is the problem. And one thing I want to point out to our followers and listeners is that in the Bill of Rights, the 9th Amendment is first before the 10th. And the 9th Amendment is certain rights belong to the people. belong to the individuals within your local communities. Then comes the states' rights. But nowhere in the 11th Amendment, it's not power resides in the federal government. There, nowhere in the Bill of Rights says anything about the federal government. It's all individual and then state, and that's it. The federal government has no rights. Federal government has no rights to take away from us. They have no power, literally, to take it. They've obtained that power by coercion and bribing with the 16th and 17th Amendment. But, after that, the federal government has no rights. And because of those cruel amendments that we have to endure, this is what we are having now. And yet, people on the right and the left, they don't want to see it. They don't care. They just throw tidbits at us and throw dog bones and throw a bone to the American people and keep them quiet, keep them in line and check. And that's why the American people are just simple-minded or just like zombies and just say yeah, and it's just sad to see that. But keep this in mind. We have the rights. It's based in our 9th Amendment right. Then comes the states' rights, and then nothing else. There is no federal government rights. Federal government has no rights. They shouldn't have any power or rights. And I hope the American people can see that in 2024. But unfortunately, we may probably have our first female president that is in bed with the global elites and all that. We don't know. Maybe we'll see the old man Trump go back again. I doubt it, but we'll see how the electorate will go. But neither of them wants to really help this republic. They just want to feather their own nest. Trump wants to do it. Trump wanted to build a Trump hotel in Moscow, and that's why he sought alliances with Russia. And Nikki Haley wants to, be a global elitist, and I don't know why she's not there right now because, that's her bread and butter. But, come 2024, look inside these candidates and see, are they really good for our republic? I say they're not. So that's just me. But look inside it. How about you, Seth? Are these candidates good for this republic?
No, not at all. And just if I'm kind of to give a little prediction, I kind of think it's going to be Trump's going to pick Nikki Haley for his VP, but that's just I thought. I don't know. I don't have any evidence for it other than just a feeling that Trump's going to pick Nikki Haley so that he has a woman on there, and it'll be Biden, Harris versus Trump, Haley, and obviously there will be third-party candidates, but we're not allowed to think about them according to the media. The election, the federal elections are meaningless. It's as I often say, we need to think locally, and we need to, and that's not only local elections are more important. Getting a good sheriff is important, but think locally in your own life and what you can do without looking towards government. What you can do to make your life better without taking tax dollars and so-called government benefits to make your life better. You look at how you can make your life better on your own, and that's got to be the focus for people if we want to get away from the tyranny that's just never ending, the soft tyranny that we're facing right now. Think locally and act locally. But the federal election's meaningless in my opinion.
Yeah, no, it is, and we'll keep discussing the election of 2024 soon with the Census out. Now it's Nikki, now it's Haley and Trump. We'll see how it goes, but just remember that neither candidates from the left or the right really care about this republic. They just care how to feather their own nest. And we'll keep reporting the truth, and hope the American people will listen to two good constitutionalists out here. And we'll be here next Sunday, so stay tuned for next Sunday, and have yourself a great night.
Yep, good night.